The South Carolina Gamecocks are traveling to Sanford Stadium this weekend to take on the two-time defending national champions, the Georgia Bulldogs. Of course, South Carolina is coming off a heartbreaking loss against North Carolina in Week 1. They rebounded with the win against Furman, and Georgia Bulldogs have faced some inferior opponents both weeks so far. This is going to be their first true test. Drew, kicking it to you. You're the Georgia fan. What has been it's the same team, same Georgia Bulldogs with new faces, new players everywhere. So who have been the new guys, the new faces that have really impressed you?
Yeah, and Georgia kept a lot of guys from last year's defense, and they rotate so many guys in on defense that have played last year. I can go on a tangent and list a bunch of people on the defense, but a lot of the main new people I want to talk about come on the offensive side of the ball, particularly at wide receiver. Transfers, Ra Thomas from Mississippi State, and transfer Missouri receiver Dominic Lovett. Those have been really the two big transfers that we got in the new faces on our offense that have had an instant impact. Now, when I say instant impact, you'll see them on the field and Ra Thomas has looked really good when he's gotten the ball. He's only has 3 catches. Dominic Lovett's been targeted a lot more. He's looked okay at times. He's had a couple drops, especially in week 1. He's kind of was off to a rough start, but he's really bounced back in week 2, and he's made some big plays for this Georgia offense. And then as far as the running back room goes, we've seen a lot of new guys running the football, and I'm going to get in a little bit deeper with this just because the Georgia's running back room is so depleted. You've seen a lot of new guys run the football, including freshman Roderick Robertson II. He is a true freshman, 6 foot, 240 pound. He's a big old dude. He's been toting the rock for Georgia a little bit in the first couple of games. I think he's looked okay at times, but he is a true freshman. Obviously, Kendall Milton's been our running back 1, but he hasn't been anywhere near as impressive as I had expected him to be. And the running back room right now is so depleted with Branson Robinson being out for the season with a torn ACL. Dejon Edwards has had a sprained MCL, but he's expected to make a return this week. He's an experienced running back for this Georgia team, and Georgia needs him now more than ever. And the Georgia running back room has been so bad and so depleted with injuries that Georgia is literally lining up with wide receivers at running back. And I'm not talking about lining them up in the backfield and sitting them out and around. I'm talking like legitimately like lining these receivers up in the backfield and giving them legitimate carries up the middle, off the edge, off tackle. Dylan Bell comes to mind. He against Ball State had a few carries and actually looked pretty good running the football. And this doesn't really surprise me. Georgia has so many slot receivers. There's probably 7 or 8 guys that play slot receiver for Georgia that can make a legitimate impact, and you can't play all of them on the field at one time. So it doesn't surprise me with the running back room being the way that it is. Georgia's trying to get these receivers in running the football because they're really talented in space. And I don't know if that's something that's going to continue on as the season goes on. Obviously, Dejon Edwards coming back might eliminate all that. Georgia's defense, though, nonetheless, still as great as always. Everything is advertised, if not even better. Georgia's given up a total of 10 points. Obviously, they played Ball State and UT Martin, so take that for what it's worth. But Georgia's first team defense has not given up a single point. Every single point that's been scored against Georgia's defense has been in the fourth quarter, primarily against the third and fourth stringers. But moving into the South Carolina offense, Aiden, obviously South Carolina has some question marks on this offense, but they do have a couple bright spots as well. What kind of threats does this South Carolina offense bring to this Georgia defense that Georgia hasn't seen so far this season?
Yeah, Spencer Rattler has definitely improved as a quarterback from last year to this year. Last year, if you follow the channel, you'll know I called him Spencer Rattled just because whenever the pocket collapsed and mentally he got hurried, that's when he started to become rattled, make mistakes, throw interceptions, and that's where you saw a lot of his questionable decisions. But this year, even though the offensive line and the protection for him has not gotten much better, in that North Carolina game, he has proved that he has matured as a quarterback and is able to sit in there and still make confident reads and deliver the football accurately. So Spencer Rattler's development is going to be the biggest problem for this Georgia defense. Now, is it going to be a problem that Georgia's defense is not going to be able to overcome? Personally, I don't think so. But this South Carolina offense does have weapons that are of, an elite caliber. The number one person that pops out to me is Trey Knox, tight end transfer from Arkansas. At Arkansas, Sam Pittman and the OC, they didn't really know how to use Trey Knox. So he goes to South Carolina. I expect him to have a big impact on the South Carolina team, but also all of South Carolina's skill position players as a whole are big. These are big guys, even for SEC standards. Joyner, 6 foot, 225 plus pounds. Trey Knox is a big guy. Leggett on the outside. Amarion Brown in the slot. I mean, these are big guys, and they are talented. The problem for South Carolina is their offensive line. Of course, they had negative rushing yards against North Carolina, including sacks. that protection and that run blocking has to be shored up if South Carolina wants to have a chance to just go to a bowl game. If they want to win against Georgia, this O-line is going to have to dominate the front seven and control the trenches, allowing Spencer Rattler in this run game to get developed just so they're not chasing from behind this whole game. So this offensive line has to be able to protect Rattler so he can get the ball to these skilled playmakers.
Yeah, and South Carolina is a very dangerous team. Like you mentioned, all the weapons they have at receiver. They have a lot of guys that are very dangerous when they can get the ball in space. And Spencer Rattler, he's a really, really good quarterback, and he's improved so much, especially in the pocket when he's been getting pressure. But at the same time, he can't make throws if he's getting sacked. And this is going to be by far the most talented defense South Carolina has seen this season. This is a defense that I'm expecting to send a lot of pressure at Spencer Rattler. The secret's not out on how to stop this South Carolina offense. They can't run the ball. They have not been able to effectively run the ball well at all. And this goes back to even last season. South Carolina was a terrible running team, and they're by far dead last in rushing offense in the SEC. Now, when you think about it, though, when you think about teams that have beaten Georgia over the past few years, a lot of them have been coming from offenses that are primarily pass heavy, with elite receivers on the outside and an elite quarterback that can sit and make these tough throws and the tight coverages. So Spencer Rattler and South Carolina offense, I think the receivers do have the capability of doing that, but they got to have the offensive line to give them time to do so. And it's just very hard to predict that to happen. This is a Georgia defense which I think has been kind of underwhelming when it comes to the pass rush, but for some reason that's just been a common trend. If you watch Georgia games, when Georgia plays inferior opponents like your Ball States or UT Martins, it's almost like I can't explain it. It's like you almost gotta like watch it to see it, but it's just like the effort just not as there as compared to when they play an SEC opponent like a South Carolina, a Tennessee. The energy level just hasn't been the same. So I'm expecting a new Georgia defense to come out with a lot more energy. I'm expecting a lot of guys to come in and make plays. And if that's the case, if South Carolina can't find a way to run the ball in this game, I think they're going to have a very tough time moving the ball down the field. I expect South Carolina to come out and pass the ball a lot in first and second down. I just don't think they can keep putting themselves in scenarios where it's third and long. And I just think that's when Georgia's defense thrives at its best, when they force obvious passing situations.
That's 100% correct, Drew. You cannot allow yourself to get behind the sticks and be in obvious passing situations, which allows for this defense to just rear their ears back and send all the pressure they want. Transitioning to Georgia's offense, specifically Carson Beck, okay? Living in Georgia, there's been a lot of talks, people with a lot of different opinions about Mike Bobo and Carson Beck, okay? A lot of people are judging Carson Beck off his first game that he started, off just the first two games that he started, saying that he is not that guy, that he is not going to be able to take Georgia to a championship. And in my opinion, that's not what I saw. Game one, I did see the nerves in the first game. But it wasn't a timing issue. He wasn't holding the ball. He was making his reads, In the second game, he looked much more composed. He was on time with pretty much all of his throws. He was not scared to make any throws, and he looked like a quarterback. So, in my opinion, this South Carolina defense, being as bad as it is, will be a good, true test for this Carson Beck team and Mike Bobo's offense. Now, I'm on the side that Mike Bobo is not the best hire for Kirby Smart and this Georgia Bulldogs. With that being said, you can't judge a guy playing two trash cans. You just can't. You got to let this guy play or coach and see how it goes whenever things are going well and not going well against SEC caliber teams. So this is going to be a big test to see how Carson Beck and Mike Bobo look. With that being said, do not think that Mike Bobo's play calling is even going to be a factor in this game. You could have Billy Joe from a tailgate outside of Sanford calling these plays, and with this Georgia Bulldogs O-line, they're going to be able to coach them to a win. So I don't know necessarily how close it's going to be. We're not going to see Carson Beck in obvious passing situations, but I just want to see him be able to control the game and be able to be a solid quarterback and make solid decisions throughout the course of the game and not make mistakes.
Yeah, and a couple things I want to touch up on about the Georgia offense. And a lot of people did, and myself included, had some questions about this Georgia offense in the first couple of games. I wasn't too terribly critical. I knew there was going to be some growing pains with a new quarterback and a new offensive coordinator. A couple things that I wanted to note, too. Last year, this is kind of a similar situation to what happened this year. People were quick to judge the offense based on a couple of bad games against some inferior opponents. And you go back to look at last year when Georgia played Kentucky and Georgia Tech. Those two teams weren't very great, and Georgia's offense looked absolutely terrible. This was towards the end of the season, and this was the two games leading up to when they played LSU in the SEC title game. And when Georgia tends to play these inferior opponents, they get very conservative with their play calling. And I'm not one to be, if someone tells me that Georgia's just trying to hide their offense for when they play a real opponent, I normally look at them and just tell them, all right, man, you don't know what you're talking about. That's not the case. Georgia's just not playing good. But it makes you think that sometimes Georgia is playing conservative on purpose against these inferior opponents to work on some weaknesses that they might think they have. And that's why you don't see Georgia taking a lot of deep shots, as, say, when they did play LSU or Ohio State or TCU. So I'm expecting to see a little bit of a different play calling heading into the South Carolina game. I expect some more aggressive play calling. And I don't think Carson Beck's really the main point of concern. I have been a little concerned about the offensive line. Not really the pass blocking part, but more for the run blocking. It's just when Georgia's offensive line lines up against anybody, first of all, you expect them to be able to push them around regardless of who they're playing. Georgia's offensive line is absolutely loaded with talent, guys who are going to be playing in the NFL. But it's been very concerning to see him play guys like UT Martin and Ball State and not be able to get much of a push. But Georgia's offensive line is going to have to be able to get a push in this game. I think Georgia, very similar to South Carolina, can't get in obvious passing situations. South Carolina's secondary is pretty good. I think South Carolina's secondary has been really good even last year. They weren't really great at stopping the run. A lot of teams just pretty much ran the ball, and a lot of South Carolina's great passing numbers on defense were basically because teams wouldn't throw on them a whole lot. And Georgia kind of did the same thing last year. Georgia really just controlled the ground and took the shots they needed to. And that's why Georgia was able to put up so many points in that game last year. So I'm expecting a lot of the same things to happen in this game. I expect Georgia to find a way to run the football. With Dejon Edwards coming back, that should help a little bit. I don't want to see Georgia getting in situations where they're putting in receivers at running back because that's going to be a concern for me if they continue to do this. That just means the running back room is depleted still. So I'm expecting Georgia to really turn up the run game. And as long as Georgia's able to run the ball, get manageable third downs, I think Georgia's going to be able to do whatever they want against the South Carolina defense. And moving into the spread's 27.5 points. That's a big number for a conference rival, regardless of who's playing who. I know everyone knows that Georgia's more talented than South Carolina from top to bottom, but this is Georgia's biggest test by far. 27.5 points is a lot of points. I really do think Georgia can cover this 27.5 points, though. I know it's a big number, but I think South Carolina's offensive line has just been that bad. I don't think South Carolina's going to be able to do a whole lot offensively. I just don't think their offensive line is going to give Rattler enough time. And if Rattler gets to making mistakes and play anything like he did at the beginning of last season, South Carolina's going to have a very rough time. And Georgia's going to be able to take advantage of that like they did last year.
Yeah, I'm in the same line of thinking as you. I think that Georgia's going to dominate the clock with the run game, dominate in the trenches with the run game, and up front with their O-line. I think they'll be fine as far as the push goes. Defensively, the front seven is going to be what the front seven has always been for Georgia. But 27.5 is too much for me. When I'm thinking about this game, Carson Beck in his first game starting against the SEC team, 5 touchdowns. That seems like a lot for Georgia. Okay, so my final prediction, I'd say, is 38-20. I think that Spencer Rattler and the playmakers on South Carolina are good enough to get them to the red zone 4 times, maybe 2 of those being touchdowns, 2 of those being field goals. And, like I was saying, Georgia's just going to dominate the clock, dominate the trenches with the run game, and defensively up in the front seven. So my final prediction is 38-20 Georgia. That'll do it for this video, guys. Make sure you like the video. If you're still here, subscribe and check out some other videos we posted recently. If you got any video ideas or anything you want to talk to us about, let us know in the comments. We appreciate you for all your support. We'll see you in the next one.